Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we take a whole stack of information, uh, pull out the really compelling insights, and deliver them straight to you.
Yep.
Today, we're diving into, well, a really diverse collection. We've got articles, reports, research findings, all kind of centering around early June 2025.
It's quite the snapshot, isn't it? Gives you a real feel for the world right now.
Absolutely. From, our big ambitions way out in space down to the ground level realities of the global economy and, well, a whole lot in between.
That's right. We've been sifting through it all. Reports on space missions, these cutting-edge scientific discoveries, analyses of economic trends, and some pretty complex international events, too.
Yeah.
It paints a picture, really. Humanity pushing boundaries in some pretty remarkable ways, but also navigating the tricky stuff, the dynamics, right here on Earth.
So our goal today is basically to be your guides through this landscape of info. We're going to highlight what jumped out at us, what feels most significant, why it might matter to you, hopefully spark a few, aha moments.
Let's do it.
Okay, let's unpack this stack, see what we found. Right, let's start by looking upwards. Space exploration. It's pretty clear from the sources that India is, well, really stepping up as a major player in human spaceflight.
Oh, definitely.
There's this bold vision for a long-term human presence beyond Earth. And a really tangible step, it seems, is this upcoming Axiom 4 mission.
Absolutely. And the Axiom 4 mission, it's not just India going it alone. It's very much a collaborative effort. Really shows that spirit of international cooperation you see in space.
So who's involved?
You've got ISRO, the Indian Space Research Organization, working alongside, the big players like NASA and the European Space Agency, ESA.
Right.
This kind of joint mission, it's just crucial for sharing expertise, resources, even just the sheer cost of getting out there.
And like a lot of these big launches, there's been a bit of a schedule shift.
Yeah, a slight one. It was originally planned for late May, but the latest from NASA points to a launch no sooner than June 8th, 2025.
Okay, so just a short delay, but still packed with significance, I take it.
Totally. And a key figure on this flight is Group Captain Shubhanshu Shukla. He's an accomplished Indian Air Force test pilot and one of India's astronaut candidates, part of their big human spaceflight program.
Having him on board, that sends a message, right?
A very clear signal, yeah. India's committed not just to developing their own astronaut corps, but actively participating, contributing to the science on the ISS. It's about building that capability, getting that hands-on experience in space.
Okay, so beyond the symbolism, which is definitely important, what's the actual work? What science are Group Captain Shukla and the crew focusing on?
Well, the science payload is pretty significant. Sources say Shukla will be involved in 12 experiments altogether during his time up there.
Whoa, okay.
Yeah, and it's a mix. 7 are biological experiments specifically designed by Indian scientists that reflects ISRO's own research priorities, in space life sciences.
And the other 5?
Those are being done in collaboration with NASA, which really showcases that integrated approach we were just talking about.
That mix is interesting. Pursuing their own goals, but also plugging into the bigger international picture on the ISS.
Precisely. And NASA's ISS program manager, Dana Weigel, she really highlighted this, mentioned plans for a joint public downlink event with NASA and ISRO.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, to demonstrate the power of international cooperation, she said, and their mutual commitment to opening up space more broadly. So it's science, but it's also diplomacy, expanding access.
Makes sense.
And Satish Balan, the ISRO project director, he confirmed that breakdown too. Said 7 experiments we had announced previously are primarily biological, suggested by Indian scientists. Apart from those, there will be 5 experiments in collaboration with NASA. It's a smart, balanced approach.
Okay, let's talk about one area that always feels a bit sci-fi, but is obviously crucial for the future. Space agriculture. Actually growing food up there.
It sounds futuristic, but yeah, it's fundamental if we're serious about long missions.
Right.
Bases on the moon, crews heading to Mars. You just can't pack enough sandwiches for that. You need to be able to grow food sustainably right where you are.
So what's Axiom 4 doing on that front?
A big chunk of Group Captain Shukla's science time will be on biological experiments looking at germination and growth of specific crops in microgravity.
Go crops.
Green gram, mung beans, and fenugreek seeds. The sources say they were chosen specifically to see how viable it is to cultivate, India-specific food crops in space.
Ah, focusing on things their own future crews might eat. Smart. What kind of data are they hoping for?
Basically, how these seeds react without gravity. How well do they sprout? How does their growth compare to Earth? What resources do they need? The practical stuff. Nutrient delivery, light exposure, all those challenges.
Right.
This data is gold. It's a necessary step for developing those complex, autonomous life support systems you'd need for, say, a Mars base. You're essentially building the instruction manual for a space farm.
Okay, feeding astronauts, big challenge. But there's another set of experiments here that could be huge for, well, potentially opening up space travel to a whole lot more people.
Yeah.
It's about human health, specifically diabetes.
Yeah, this is genuinely fascinating stuff. The goal is to gather data that could, eventually, allow people with diabetes to travel to space.
Yeah.
Which right now is a major no-go.
Really, people with insulin-dependent diabetes can't become astronauts.
That's what the sources indicate, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's mostly because managing blood sugar levels in microgravity is just incredibly difficult. The body behaves differently, that delicate balance gets thrown way off. It's a huge medical hurdle.
So how is Axiom 4 trying to tackle this?
This research project, it's called Sweet Ride, and it's described as a well-rounded attempt to get some critical insights. It involves a few different things.
Okay.
One or more astronauts will wear continuous glucose meters, CGMs, those little wearable devices, for their whole 2-week stay.
Uh-huh.
And what's really interesting here is that a research team back on Earth will be monitoring these readings in real time.
Wow, real-time monitoring from the ground while they're in orbit. That feels like a big step.
It is, especially as part of this comprehensive study, because alongside the real-time CGM data, they're also collecting blood samples during the flight.
For validation.
Exactly, to check how accurate the CGM readings actually are in microgravity. That's crucial if you're going to trust that tech in space. And they're testing the insulin itself, too. They'll have both refrigerated and room temperature insulin pens up there to see if the insulin stays stable and effective in space conditions.
So it's really covering all the bases, the monitoring tech, checking its accuracy, and making sure the medicine works.
Pretty much. Mohammed Fichon, he's the clinical lead for Sweet Ride. He emphasized that this study is doing several things together for the first time, that real-time CGM monitoring, plus the validation and checking the insulin viability.
And the potential impact goes beyond just space travel.
That's what Fidian highlighted. Yes, the main goal is understanding microgravity's effect on diabetes to make space accessible. But the data, the insights, they could be incredibly valuable for managing diabetes right here on Earth.
How so? What's the connection between zero-G and patients on Earth?
Well, he drew parallels between some effects of microgravity like fluid shifts, less physical activity, and the situation of, say, long-term bedridden patients, people whose mobility is really limited. Insights into how metabolism and blood sugar control change up there could potentially lead to better strategies, maybe even better tech, for managing diabetes in those patient groups down here. It's a great example of space research having unexpected benefits back home.
That's pretty cool, even for a short study, just 2 weeks.
Yeah, it's considered critical data, laying the groundwork. And it builds on previous work, too.
Right, this isn't the absolute first step.
No, exactly. Other missions have gathered bits and pieces. Like the private Polaris Dawn mission had astronauts wearing CGMs, mostly just to see if the tech worked up there. And a suborbital flight, Galactic 07, tested insulin pens briefly. Axiom 4 is pulling these threads together into a much more complete investigation with Sweet Ride.
Okay, so beyond all this amazing science, there's a very human element too, inspiring young people.
Definitely a critical goal, especially for ISRO's involvement. There's a big outreach event planned for students back in India.
I saw something about a live link-up.
Yes, exactly. A planned live broadcast. Group Captain Shukla will interact directly with students across India using the radio comms on the ISS.
Wow.
Students from all over will get a chance to ask questions, connect with an astronaut in orbit. The goal is pretty clear. Get kids excited about STEM science, tech, engineering, math. Show them what's possible with global cooperation in space.
That could be huge for them.
Sources are calling it a first-of-its-kind learning experience for students in India. Just imagine how memorable that would be, bringing the excitement of space right into their lives.
It really sounds like Axiom 4 is just packed with purpose, pushing boundaries, tackling big challenges for long-term space living, human health, and inspiring the next generation.
Absolutely. It's a fantastic example of how space exploration weaves together fundamental research, international partnership, and that really important educational outreach piece.
All right, let's shift gears dramatically now. Bring it back down to earth, dive into the global economy, financial markets. Our sources around early June 2025, they paint a pretty complex picture. Lots of mixed signals, specific things happening in different regions.
Yeah, it's a snapshot of those economic currents flowing right now, influenced by, well, everything. national labor data, what people expect central banks to do, big corporate decisions, even the wider political climate internationally.
Okay, a huge data point that dropped was the May 2025 jobs report from the U.S. What did that tell us?
So the report showed the U.S. economy added 139,000 jobs in May. Unemployment rate held steady at 4.2%.
139,000. On the surface, sounds okay. Relatively solid.
That's how Colin Martin from Schwab put it, yeah. Another relatively solid jobs report, despite fears of a lingering slowdown. He pointed out that if you look at the trend, like the 3-month average, it's around 135,000, which he said isn't far from average.
Oh, wait, weren't there some downward revisions? That always adds context.
Ah, yes, crucial detail. The numbers for March and April, they got revised down quite a bit, took away a combined 95,000 jobs that were initially reported.
Eef. Okay.
So yeah, that brings that 3-month average down to 135,000. Still positive, but it does suggest maybe some softening compared to earlier in the year. It fits with Martin's other comment that the weakness that many on Wall Street have been expecting still hasn't really shown up in the data yet. It's not falling off a cliff, but maybe the growth pace is easing off.
Did the report show where the jobs were coming from? Any particular sectors strong or weak?
Yeah, we saw continued strength in places like healthcare and leisure. They added a decent number of jobs, but sectors tied to trade and manufacturing. Very little growth there, according to the sources. Maybe even slight declines.
Trade and manufacturing weakness. Could that tie into other things, like maybe tariff concerns?
Potentially, yeah. That's
Wait.
something that popped up in other economic commentary we saw.
Yeah.
It's all connected.
And wages, always a big one. Consumer spending versus inflation worries.
Right. Wage growth in May was actually a bit stronger than expected. Average hourly earnings up 0.4% for the month. That brings the year-over-year rate to 3.9%.
So good for workers' wallets.
Generally supportive of spending, yeah.
Yeah.
More disposable income. But from a business angle, rising labor costs, especially at that pace, can squeeze profit margins, particularly if productivity isn't keeping up.
Right.
That specific dynamic labor costs versus productivity was something Liz Ann Saunders and Kathy Jones from Schwab highlighted. They called it, quote, not a great combination.
Okay, so how did the markets actually react to the jobs number?
Pretty clearly. Treasury yields jumped. The 10-year yield climbed back over 4.45%. Indicating bond investors basically saw it as meaning the Fed has less reason to cut interest rates super soon. Equities also added to gains they'd made earlier, and the odds the market was pricing in for near-term Fed cuts went down. So while the job number wasn't maybe a blockbuster, the combo of the gain plus that wage growth was enough to make the market think, okay, maybe policy stays tighter for a bit longer.
And within the overall market, some individual stocks were making big moves, both ways.
Absolutely. You had the S&P 500 trading near 6,000, which one source noted hadn't happened since February, and the index was up overall. But yes, specific companies felt pressure. Tesla, for instance, had a noticeable decline.
And the sources linked that too.
Explicitly linked it, at least partly, to that ongoing public spat between Elon Musk and former President Trump. Probably touch on that more later. Broadcom also dropped. Even though their earnings technically beat expectations, maybe suggests the market's hopes for anything AI-related were just sky high.
Yeah, expectations game.
Exactly. And DocuSign took a pretty big hit after their quarterly results disappointed investors.
So the jobs report was a driver, definitely, but company specifics and even political noise clearly playing a role in individual stock moves.
That's right. And with the jobs report out, the market was already looking ahead.
Next up, May inflation data, big treasury auctions. Those could shift the mood again.
Okay, let's shift focus geographically. The sources looking at India seem to show a different kind of picture, more positive momentum.
Yeah, there was definitely a risk-on rally vibe described in Indian markets around then. Defense stocks, micro caps, reportedly drove a surge in May. And that positive feeling carried into June, partly helped by a recent Reserve Bank of India rate cut. Suggests investors were feeling pretty optimistic about growth there.
We also saw some specific corporate news highlighting expansion strategy moves.
Yeah, Infosys, the big IT services company, they announced a new center opening in Gift City. That's India's hub for international financial services.
This center is focusing on BFSI digital services, banking, financial services, insurance. Plan is over 1,000 employees. Hybrid model. Big investment in the key area.
And they also had an interesting hiring incentive.
Yeah, a cash reward policy for employees who refer candidates that get hired. Probably a move to boost recruitment, in a competitive talent market.
And on the consumer side, a big international brand making a move.
Little Caesars, third largest pizza chain globally. They're entering the Indian market. starting in the Delhi NCR region, partnered with Harnessing Harvest.
Why is that significant?
Well, it points to the sheer size and potential of India's pizza market. One source projected it could hit like $11.8 billion by 2033.
Wow.
Yeah, so they're jumping into a competitive space, but obviously see huge opportunity.
Beyond specific companies, there was news about government initiatives, broader data.
The central government reportedly doubled the cap for direct scientific purchases. The idea is to give researchers more autonomy, maybe speed things up for buying equipment, materials.
Streamlining research.
Well, hopefully. And the government was also highlighting big changes in the agriculture sector over the last 11 years. Budget surged 5 times since 2013. Crop output jumped. Shows a real focus on boosting that critical sector.
And a major data point on poverty.
Yes. World Bank data came out around then,
Mm-hmm.
showed a really sharp, substantial drop in extreme poverty in India. The rate reportedly fell to 5.3%. That's a huge number of people moving out of extreme poverty. Big deal for economic inclusion, social well-being.
There were also some maybe more technical changes affecting businesses. Tax compliance.
Indeed. Changes to the GST goods and services tax compliance rules, set to kick in from July 2025. The monthly GSTR-3B filing gets locked. Changes have to go through a different form, GSTR-1A, and returns become time-barred after 3 years.
Any concerns raised about that?
Experts reportedly flag potential risks, yeah. Especially if there isn't a clear way for businesses to fix errors easily. So something businesses in India will need to get their heads around.
Okay, zooming out a bit, we heard some broader economic commentary too. Sridhar Vembu from Zoho had thoughts on AI and automation.
Yeah, a really interesting perspective.
Yeah.
He pushed back on the common fear that AI is mainly about mass job loss. His argument, as reported, is that the bigger worry isn't jobs disappearing, but how the wealth from all that automation gets distributed.
Meaning?
If automation makes things super efficient, but only a few companies or owners benefit, it just makes inequality worse.
So what's the alternative, according to him?
He suggested 2 potential paths. 1, drastically cut the cost of goods and services, so everyone benefits from the productivity gains through cheaper living. Or 2, significantly boost pay for jobs that are inherently human creativity, empathy, complex judgment, things harder to automate fully.
Makes sense.
And he really stressed the need for regulatory oversight for AI to stop monopolies forming and actively make sure automation's benefits get shared widely.
That thinking connects back to some of those other concerns we mentioned, right? Like from Schwab about rising labor costs, but negative productivity, tariffs, debt.
Exactly. It all interacts, creates this complex, sometimes challenging economic picture.
And finally, on the regulatory front, something about protecting online shoppers.
Yeah, the CCPA in India, the Central Consumer Protection Authority, reportedly told e-commerce platforms to self-audit for dark patterns.
Dark patterns.
Those sneaky design tricks on websites or apps, things that manipulate you into, say, signing up for something you didn't want or adding extra stuff to your cart without realizing. This action shows a focus on protecting consumers in that online space.
So quite a dynamic economic landscape then. National labor trends, global market reactions, corporate strategies, government policies, even regulating the digital world.
Truly highlights how interconnected everything is, constantly shaped by tech, regulations, and just how businesses and consumers behave.
Okay, we've hit space, we've grounded ourselves in the economy. Let's broaden the lens now, scan across some other really intriguing developments. Science, tech, various global events our sources picked up.
Yeah, it's like stepping back to see the whole tapestry, connecting the dots between those focused topics, showing just the sheer diversity of what's going on.
Let's start by looking even deeper into space. Some amazing new findings beyond our solar system.
We saw reports with new details about Uranus, the ice giant, specifically about its atmosphere, its really strange extreme seasons.
How'd they figure that out?
By analyzing like 2 decades of Hubble Space Telescope images from 2002 to 2022, studying these distant planets over long stretches like that really helps understand how these alien atmospheres work.
And something much more dramatic. A massive black hole waking up.
This is pretty wild. Astronomers found this massive black hole in a galaxy called SDSS 1335 plus 0728. About 300 million light years away. It had been quiet for like 20 years, and then suddenly, bam, it started actively gobbling up surrounding gas.
Making the galaxy flare up.
Exactly. The whole core of its host galaxy lit up brightly, turned into what they call an active galactic nucleus, an AGN. Witnessing that kind of switch on gives incredible data on how black holes feed.
Wow. Okay, back a bit closer to home, in the asteroid belt. A new theory about Vesta,
Yeah, researchers are suggesting Vesta, which we usually think of as a protoplanet, might actually be a big chunk of a much larger lost planet, something that existed early on but got destroyed.
A lost planet fragment.
That's the idea. If true, it could really change our models of how the solar system formed, how chaotic things were back then.
And the James Webb Telescope keeps delivering finding distant stuff.
Oh, absolutely. Using Webb, astronomers reportedly found the most distant dead galaxy yet,
Dead meaning.
stopped forming new stars. And this one stopped incredibly early, just 700 million years after the Big Bang. Studying these helps us figure out why star formation just shut down in some parts of the young universe.
And then there's the just plain weird one.
Right. This unknown object, ASCAP J1A320911, is sending out strange signals, X-rays, and radio waves, pulsing like clockwork every 44 minutes.
What is it?
They don't know for sure. It's in this new category, long-period radio transients. Could be a weird neutron star, could be something else entirely. The regularity is part of the puzzle.
Okay, bringing it right back to Earth. Even trees might be warning us about volcanoes.
Fascinating NASA study highlighted this. They used satellite images, looked at subtle changes in tropical tree leaves specifically, shifts in CO2 absorption patterns right at the surface.
Yeah.
They found this data could potentially give early warnings of volcanic eruptions. A totally new way to use satellites for hazard prediction.
Cool. Okay, shifting from discovery to tech connecting the world, Amazon's Kuiper satellites.
Yep, reportedly launching their first batch. This is their big project, aiming for over 3,200 satellites in low Earth orbit. Goal is global internet, especially for rural, underserved areas. Clearly taking aim at SpaceX's Starlink.
Competition in space internet, and more physical connections too. A new cable?
Huge one. Chile signed an agreement with Google. They're building the first submarine fiber optic cable directly connecting South America and Australia.
Wow, that's a long stretch.
Massive undertaking. Will seriously boost data speeds and capacity between those continents. Affects everything from business to just browsing the web.
And on a more fun tech note, something gamers were waiting for.
Nintendo reportedly released the Switch 2 console in most big regions around this time. Huge event in the gaming world, obviously. Big implications for the industry, for consumers.
We also saw a bunch of other cool science snippets. Chemistry, biology, even archaeology.
Japanese scientists developed this amazing new plastic.
Yeah.
Dissolves completely in seawater in just a few hours.
Without leaving nasty stuff behind.
That's what the sources noted, yeah. No harmful residues could be a massive breakthrough for tackling ocean plastic pollution.
That would be incredible. And something about bed bugs in ancient cities.
Yeah. A study suggested bed bugs were probably one of the very first pests to plague human cities. As people started living together in bigger settlements thousands of years ago, these little guys thrived. A less glamorous peek into early urban life.
Gross, but interesting. And ancient tools from whale bones.
Scientists dated the oldest known tools made from whale bones back to about 20,000 years ago. Finding tools like that from that long ago tells us a lot about how adaptable and skilled prehistoric people were, how they used marine resources. And looking ahead, the sources touched on machine learning and quantum computing too.
Their potential impact.
Huge potential, yeah. Machine learning is speeding up discovery everywhere, predicting diseases, designing drugs, finding patterns in giant data sets. And quantum computing, moving from bits to qubits, could totally reshape computing, security, even global power dynamics. Though, still big challenges there.
And a physics concept explaining why time only goes one way.
Entropy and irreversibility. Sources mention how entropy, that measure of disorder, basically gives us the physical reason for the arrow of time, why things go from order to disorder, why you can't unscramble an egg, essentially.
Does that have practical uses?
Oh, yeah. Influences engine design, computers. And intriguingly, researchers are even looking at its relevance to maybe understanding or even slowing down aging at a biological level.
Wild. Of course, pushing tech boundaries isn't always smooth sailing. SpaceX and Starship testing.
Right, their big reusable rocket system.
Yeah.
There was a test flight reported May 28th, 9th test. Notable because they used a booster that had flown before key step for reusability.
How'd it go?
Well, it passed milestones where previous tests failed. But the Starship upper stage reportedly spun out of control coming down. Failed the controlled splashdown, hit the ocean instead. The FAA had authorized it, expanded the hazard zones beforehand, so it highlights the ongoing risks, the engineering challenges in developing these complex systems meant to make space cheaper.
Okay, moving now to the broader global stage. Our sources covered international relations, various world events happening, and it's really important here as we talk about this to just reiterate. We are strictly reporting what the sources contain. These events are complex, often have multiple viewpoints, can be very politically charged. Our job is just to convey what was reported, not take sides or endorse anything.
Absolutely key. Impartial reporting on the source material is crucial here.
So we saw reports of actions by the U.S. government with big international ripples.
One was the U.S. vetoing a UN Security Council resolution. This resolution reportedly called for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. Sources noted the U.S. veto was against the 14 other members who voted for it.
Okay. And sanctions related to the ICC.
Yes, the U.S. reportedly put sanctions on 4 judges from the International Criminal Court. Sources cited this as retaliation for ICC rulings concerning the U.S. and Israel, including reportedly an arrest warrant for Israeli PM Netanyahu and an earlier ICC decision to investigate alleged war crimes by U.S. troops in Afghanistan. The sanctions apparently included freezing any U.S. assets that judges might have.
And the U.S. Supreme Court ruled on a case brought by Mexico.
Right. The court blocked a major lawsuit Mexico had filed against U.S. gun manufacturers. Mexico was seeking reportedly $10 billion, alleging the companies didn't do enough to stop guns flowing to drug cartels. The Supreme Court's decision was unanimous, reportedly citing a lack of sufficient evidence that the manufacturers directly facilitated those illegal sales.
There were also reported actions on immigration, international travel policy.
U.S. President Trump reportedly issued a proclamation banning entry for nationals from 12 specific countries, characterized as very high risk in the proclamation, citing terrorism concerns, hostile governments, visa overstays.
Did he link it to anything specific?
Sources noted he referenced a recent firebombing attack in Boulder, Colorado as part of the reasoning. The proclamation reportedly had exemptions for athletes, diplomats, others. And in response, the nation of Chad reportedly suspended issuing visas to U.S. citizens.
Okay, now a dynamic that got a lot of attention in the sources. That very public feud between Elon Musk and former President Trump.
Yeah, this was widely reported. Detailed accounts of ongoing public disagreements, tension. One really notable account, attributed to Steve Bannon, claimed a physical altercation involving Musk and Scott Bessent. Musk allegedly hit Bessent's ribs like a rugby player, with Trump reportedly saying it was too much.
Wow. And warnings involved.
Sources highlighted a reported warning from Trump to Musk, suggesting very serious consequences if Musk backed Democrats financially or politically.
And amidst all that, speculation about Musk trying to smooth things over or maybe looking for backup plans.
Yes, reports suggested Musk might have deleted some tweets or posts. Some interpreted that as trying to de-escalate, maybe mend ties with Trump's circle. Alongside that, other reports talked about potential plan Bs for SpaceX, maybe moving parts to the UAE, and mentions of the EU promoting a Choose Europe initiative, maybe trying to woo Musk. Highlights the huge economic, political stakes for his companies given his public profile. Again, stressing this is all based on the reports we saw.
We also saw reports touching on the India-Pakistan dynamic, different perspectives presented there.
Sources mentioned Pakistan reportedly asking President Trump to help arrange talks with India. At the same time, other reports highlighted Trump himself claiming he'd previously stopped a potential India-Pakistan war, saying reportedly that trade threats ended the conflict.
So different narratives being put out.
Exactly. Illustrates the different diplomatic angles, public statements. We're just reporting the fact that these statements and reports were out there, as presented in the source material.
And beyond those specific geopolitical points, the sources gave us snapshots of just a whole range of other things happening globally. Reminds you how much goes on all at once.
Yeah, just a few examples to round it out. The ban on disposable vapes coming into force in the UK. Big regulatory move.
Okay.
In sports, Coco Gauff reportedly won the women's singles at the French Open. We saw the outcome of South Korea's presidential election, Lee Jae-myung elected. And sadly, the report of that tragic stampede at a stadium event in Bengaluru, India, with fatalities and injuries.
Right.
These diverse things, regulations, sports wins, political changes, public safety incidents, just show the breadth of global activity at any moment.
Looking back across this whole deep dive from, tiny seeds growing in space to these huge global political and economic forces, you start to see connections, themes emerging.
What really stands out is that constant interplay. International cooperation versus national ambitions, or sometimes even tensions. We saw great examples of cooperation in space. ISRO, NASA, ESA on Axiom 4, the ESA chief talking collaboration with ISRO.
Right.
But that exists right alongside areas of real tension or competition we saw elsewhere. Concerns about tariffs hitting trade, Those political feuds involving global CEOs, the international legal clashes like the UN veto or ICC sanctions.
And national goals are clearly driving a lot of it.
Absolutely. India's ambitions in space, its economic growth figures that shows a national drive. U.S. policies on trade, immigration, international bodies reflect its strategies. Reports involving other nations highlight their objectives too.
Yeah.
Everyone acting and reacting to this complex system.
So whether it's doing delicate biotests and microgravity, crunching jobs report numbers, peering into distant galaxies, or navigating these incredibly complex diplomatic rows, all these activities at totally different scales are all painting this incredibly rich, complex, constantly changing picture of the world we're in right now.
It's that continuous dynamic, isn't it? Pushing frontiers, managing competition, building partnerships, facing challenges, all part of the ongoing human's story. Outro.
Wow. Okay, that was quite the journey through our sources today, wasn't it? We went from planning to grow beans and testing diabetes tech way up on the ISS
Yeah.
to dissecting global job markets, wrestling with AI's impact on wealth distribution, then zooming way out to spot distant black holes, mysterious signals from space, learning about ancient tools, and then navigating the, well, sometimes choppy waters of international relations and global events.
It's an incredible breadth of activity all happening at once.
Exactly. And what's so fascinating is how these seemingly disconnected things like, space experiments and chronic disease research on Earth or market moves influenced by political spats and trade policies are often really deeply interconnected. They impact each other.
Totally. That drive for life support in space gives insights for healthcare or farming here. Geopolitical tension directly hits big companies, markets, maybe even your travel plans. It's all linked.
It really makes you appreciate just how many frontiers humanity is exploring and impacting all at the same time. Scientific, economic, diplomatic, technological, even just the frontier of navigating daily life in this complex world, dealing with new gadgets, public safety, compliance changes.
Which, it raises a big question for you, the listener, to maybe mull over. As we keep accelerating discovery, pushing boundaries, confronting these complex global challenges, whether it's economic gaps, health crises, international conflicts, how do we make sure the knowledge we gain, the advances we make, actually benefit everyone? How do we make sure we're bridging gaps in access, wealth, opportunity, instead of accidentally creating new divides?
Yeah, that's a lot to think about, definitely. We've really only scratched the surface of what's in these sources today. Always more to explore.
Keep digging. Keep asking questions.
And we'll be back with another deep dive very soon.